This is Governor Ron DeSantis from Florida. I'm here with a number of great people, but first and foremost, the state's Surgeon General, Dr. Joseph Ladapo, is with us here today. And this is the second time we've actually come in this studio in West Palm Beach over the last year. We had a great roundtable earlier in 2022 and discussed a lot of the issues regarding COVID-19, and we're going to talk about accountability on some of that here today. But it was actually at that event where Dr. Ladapo was the first, made Florida the first state to recommend against giving the mRNA shots to these young kids. And that was something that, that was not considered popular to do in certain circles, but it was something that was following the actual data and the evidence that we had. And then now, since then, he's been able to build off that, and we'll talk more about some of the things he's done and we've done. We also have a lot of great people here in person. We're joined today by Stanford's Jay Bhattacharya, who we won't censor here today like they did with Twitter and some of the social media companies. We have joining us again is Tracy Hogue. Thank you for being here. Also, repeat for us is Dr. Joseph Freeman, now in person. He was on the Zoom last time. And we also have Stephen Templeton and Brett Weinstein, both PhDs. So thank you. Joining us virtually, we have Christine Stable-Ben, who's a doctor from Denmark, and she's joining us from across the pond, as well as Martin Kulldorff, who's participated on our panels. And actually, I think it was both Jay and Martin were on a panel with me, I think like 2 years ago, that Google and YouTube censored because they were advocating against forced masking of kids in school. And so they actually put a warning label on that. So we're going to give it, I'm going to give it to everyone here to do an introduction, couple minutes, but mainly, you know, what's on your mind about where we are with COVID, with the vaxes, with Fauci, accountability, the CDC, anything that you want to talk about, and then we'll get into some of the other issues. And so we'll start with Joe Ladapo.
Yeah, I'm having deja vu. Apparently, I think it was 8 months ago when we were here and we made, I think, one of the most important announcements that we've made during my time as Surgeon General, and told parents it was okay not to give into the pressure from their doctors to give their kids vaccines that they didn't feel comfortable with, specifically these mRNA COVID-19 vaccines that were approved a little bit quickly. And so we're here again, and we're going to be making some other important announcements today that will keep moving the state of Florida and the country in a direction that is more in line with truth and scientific data and common sense. So we're going to be doing more of that today, and we have just a fantastic, fabulous cast of scientists who are not only terrific scientists, but also terrific individuals, and have been willing to stand up and speak their truth despite all the pressure that we know individuals who don't stick to the script face. So, so please, I think maybe Dr. Bhattacharya is next.
I'm Jay Bhattacharya. I'm a professor of medicine in the medical school at Stanford University. I think this has been a tremendously difficult time for basically everybody, but we're near the tail end of it, and it's time to start taking stock of what went wrong and make reforms so this doesn't happen again. I think the centrally important issue that caused the problems is that we silenced people from expressing their thinking, qualified people from expressing their thinking, and as a result, the decision-making at the top of the country was absolutely abysmal. When you have censorship, the kinds of suppression of voices, essentially, effectively, a social credit system demeaning people who disagree with, you know, the CDC or whatever, you're going to get bad decisions that don't get checked. And I think that's, I think we have to discuss that, as well as a large number of other pandemic decisions that harmed the lives of tremendous number of people, including vaccine mandates and many other things. Not in Florida so much. And I think we owe the American people that. And I'm looking forward to working in coming years to reform American public health so that when there is another pandemic, we do a much better job than we did during this one.
Great. Tracy?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here again. Great to be back and among everyone here. And I am a physician. I have multiple roles professionally. I'm in private practice in Northern California, and I also work as a researcher and epidemiologist. I'm currently just started actually at UCSF and another company in the Bay Area called Acumen. And I have been doing research throughout the pandemic on COVID-19 transmission, especially among children and in schools, on mask mandates, on vaccine risk-benefit analyses, and I know we're going to be discussing the latter today. Recently had a paper out about booster mandates with a risk-benefit analysis and the ethics of mandating boosters in college-age students. And so I was saying to Governor DeSantis this morning that I think it's important to keep in mind that for a lot of us here, maybe some of us are considered to be contrarians or going against the popular viewpoint, but you know, the people brought here today are really evidence-based scientists and physicians, and our viewpoints would not be considered contrarian in Scandinavia for the most part. And so it's great for us to have this platform to discuss the science, and thanks so much.
Thank you. Okay, Joseph Freeman.
As he says, my name is Dr. Joseph Freeman. I'm an emergency physician. I mainly work out in Cajun country of Louisiana in rural hospitals. And with my spare time, I'm a clinical scientist. Recently, I've been mostly focused on messenger RNA vaccine research, looking at specifically at serious harms from the vaccines. That's partially why I'm here today to speak about this. I think I want to give a quick story to explain even how I got to this place, because when this started, I wasn't scared that the vaccines were going to cause serious harm. If anything, I maybe was concerned they weren't going to be as effective as they had claimed initially, but I never had expected that they could potentially cause a large amount of serious harm. And this all sort of changed for me when I was working in the ER. I remember throughout the pandemic, we'd get surges of COVID, and lots of critical patients, lots of death. And then it was the first surge, the second surge. All of them also had very few patients coming into the hospital, but of all the ones who were, it was critical. And that's unusual. That's a very unusual pattern. Then after the third surge, it was about February of 2021, and I noticed that we were having a surge. It felt like a surge. Lots of critical patients, lots of death, same pattern, but no one had COVID anymore. And it wasn't just my hospital. It was my whole region. We had to transfer all the way to Houston. We rarely have to transfer across state lines. And I remember calling a physician in California, and I asked if she's seeing the same thing. She said, yeah, I am. And she said, it kind of looks like everyone has these COVID complications, but they all are testing negative for COVID, and passed by with that time. Then in May, I believe May of 2021, we learned that the COVID spike protein was toxic. We didn't know this before, and it caused all those things that were crazy things that we learned about the first year of COVID it causes COVID toe, causes heart attacks, causes strokes, causes stomach problems. And then it sort of clicked for me. It made me started getting concerned that that surge that we all sort of witnessed and just kind of washed off as not knowing exactly what caused it, I became concerned that that might have been caused by the vaccine. And that is what started me down this path to look for it. The first part of that anecdote that I felt is now confirmed, because we did have excess mortality in 2021. So what is the cause of that excess mortality is still not determined.
Thank you. Okay, Stephen Templeton.
It's an honor to be here with such a distinguished group of people. I'm an immunologist by training. Went to University of Iowa and studied viral immunology. And then I moved on to CDC NIOSH to study occupational health and inhalation exposures. and lung immunology. So then I moved on to where I am now. I'm an associate professor at Indiana University School of Medicine, and I study models of lung immunity to a fungal pathogen. I became pretty concerned at the beginning of the pandemic about how science was being politicized, and not just as a scientist, but as a parent of school-age children. And so I got involved on a local level and began writing and speaking and serving on local boards with the school district. And I was really concerned about how children were being treated and how evidence-based medicine was not being followed. And politics seemed to be the reason, because science is a very slow-building consensus from a lot of different actors. And I was seeing that when the consensus changes pretty quickly, there's usually some political reasons and not science reasons. So I began writing and speaking out about that, and eventually brought me here to this group, which I'm delighted to be a part of. I am very interested in being a part of an examination of the pandemic response at all levels. I'm very happy to be a part of those efforts.
Great, thanks. Okay, Brett Weinstein.
Hi, I'm Brett Weinstein. I'm an evolutionary biologist. My specialty is evolutionary trade-offs. I've studied the relationship between cancer and senescence. I've studied the evolution of human morality. I've studied the relationship between species diversity and latitude. And I also, in my dissertation work, studied neotropical bats, which are obviously relevant to COVID in a sense. It may not be obvious to people why you would have an evolutionary biologist on a panel like this. I'm obviously not an epidemiologist, I'm not a vaccinologist, I'm not a doctor, but evolutionary biology is the linking thread that connects all of the various fields involved in understanding the COVID pandemic, and so it's the right toolkit for wrestling the big picture into clarity. And I must tell you that big picture is extremely disturbing. In fact, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that all told, the decision-making surrounding COVID amounts to the largest blunder in human history. From the fateful decision to search out the ancestor of SARS-CoV-2 in the wild, bring it into the lab, enhance its capacity to infect humans, to our inept and narrow response once that virus had escaped into the wild, we have what is, in effect, an ongoing self-inflicted wound. Worse still, the poor decision-making at the very beginning of COVID, not acknowledging that the virus was circulating and not treating it with the best tools at our disposal, left us in a situation where we effectively ran out the clock on the very brief period of time in which we might have driven the virus to extinction. So at this point, we have millions needlessly dead. We have trillions of dollars of wealth that have been destroyed, and the vital systems that humanity depends on have been stressed to their very limit. But worse than that, we have now made this virus into a permanent fellow traveler of humanity. And what that means is that as staggering as the costs that we've already paid have been, the costs yet to come will certainly dwarf them.
Thank you. Okay, then joining us remotely, we have Christine Stable-Ben. Is she able to be connected? Yes.
I am, yes. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. I watched the first roundtable, or the last one perhaps, on COVID-19 vaccines to children with great interest, and it's truly a great honor to be here and participate today together with this great bunch of scientists. So my background is that I'm a medical doctor. I'm a PhD and Doctor of Medical Science, and also a Professor of Global Health at University of Southern Denmark. And I've been doing research on vaccines, mostly in Africa, but also in my home country, Denmark, for almost 30 years. Our group has discovered that vaccines, in addition to their specific effects against the vaccine disease, also have what we have coined non-specific effects, or also called off-target effects or heterologous effects on other diseases. They affect the immune system more broadly than previously thought, and that means that they can affect the risk of other infections, but also the risk of other diseases in a way that hadn't been anticipated and in a manner that they weren't designed for. For some vaccines, we've seen that these non-specific effects can be incredibly beneficial. For other vaccines, unfortunately, the price of the specific protection come at the price that for a while after receiving that vaccine, the risk of other infections can be higher, actually. So I'm here to contribute with my knowledge about vaccines, about their specific effects, but particularly also their non-specific effects, and also to emphasize that based on the science, it's now clear that we cannot anticipate to know the full effect of any vaccine if we've only studied its effect against the target disease. We also need to study its effects against other diseases, its effects against on overall mortality and overall morbidity. And this particular knowledge got me concerned when we started recommending vaccines to everybody, because I simply didn't think that the vaccines had been investigated thoroughly enough for their non-specific effects. In fact, they haven't been investigated for their non-specific effects. So this means that particularly for children and young people who weren't at a high risk of severe COVID-19, I was concerned that non-specific effects might outweigh or exceed negative non-specific effects. Potential negative non-specific effects might exceed the benefits achieved from the specific protection against COVID-19. Yes, once again, thrilled to be here with you and happy to contribute as much as I can.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And then also joining us remotely is Martin Kaldorf. Can we tee Martin up and let him there he is.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. I'm a professor of medicine at Harvard University, currently on leave. I'm a biostatistician and an epidemiologist. I have worked for several decades on early detection of infectious disease outbreaks and monitoring infectious disease outbreaks, as well as monitoring the safety of vaccines and drugs after they have been approved by the FDA. I agree with Dr. Weinstein that our approach to this pandemic is the biggest public health mistakes in history, the biggest public health fiasco in history. We basically disregarded basic principles of public health. And in 2020, together with Jay Bhattacharya and Dr. Sunata Gupta at Oxford, I authored the Great Barrington Declaration, where we argued for a different approach with better focused protection on older, high-risk people while keeping schools open and not locking down the rest of society. I think now, over 2 years later, we have been proven right, and Florida and Sweden were two exceptions to the strategy, and both Sweden and Florida has come out on top when it comes to both COVID mortality and even more importantly, all-cause mortality. Sweden has among the lowest COVID and all-cause mortality in Europe, for example. So I think it's very tragic what we have gone through by mismanaging this pandemic so thoroughly. And at this point, we need to find a way to make sure that it never happens again, as well as rebuilding scientific and public health institutions.
Thank you. Well, this is part of the reason why we in Florida rejected things like mandates and banned things like vaccine passports. So what you had is you had a lot of elites in this country trying to condition society so that if you didn't bend the knee, then you were basically a second-class citizen. And so in Florida, we rejected that and made sure that people could make their own decisions. And I think that this is part of the reason why, is because, like, how could you use either coercive power of the state or use, private sector collusion to force a choice on someone without having any idea how that's going to impact that particular individual. And so we wanted to make sure we were empowering individuals with the ability to make these decisions. And, part of this issue and other issues with COVID, goes back to an attempt to enforce one acceptable narrative on all these issues. And, you saw it with the censorship of Dr. Bhattacharya with Twitter. You also saw it with Dr. Fauci and some of these people saying that they needed to go after these people who wrote the Great Barrington Declaration. They wanted to not contest the ideas in that. They basically wanted to smear them because they didn't want to have any criticism of their lockdown policies. And so part of the reason I think it's been a bad response is because from the very beginning, you had a lot of arrogance that it's our way or the highway, and anyone that offers any type of a dissenting opinion. And they were censoring from day one. People that would write anti-lockdown things in March of 2020, April 2020, some of those would get taken down off some of these big tech platforms. And so we saw that over and over again. And I think that ultimately, your policies or your positions or your analysis of this medical science should stand on its own. And if it's not able to accept criticism, if you can't defend the policy against valid criticism, then maybe you need to be looking in the mirror. But that's not what these elites wanted to do. They wanted to just cocoon themselves from any criticism and to try to denigrate anybody that had a different way of thinking. So I think with the Twitter, what Elon Musk is doing, I think there's going to be a lot more that comes out with that. And I think that that's very important. But I think it's also important to say, Twitter is not even close to most of the censorship what was going on. They're a much smaller company than like a Google or YouTube or some of these others. And I guarantee you everything that was going on in Twitter is going on in these others, if not even more so. And we got a sense of that when they went after us for having the opposing the masks, having the experts oppose the masks for these young kids. Why don't we start with Jay about, with mRNA vaccines, but then just generally, lockdowns, you couldn't say, well, wait a minute, if you lock down, that's going to cause harm for people's mental health or jobs or all this. And it seems like with the mRNA, you can't just say, well, hey, we don't know everything about it. Here's what it is. But there may be these things. It's like if you raise any type of cost benefit, kind of the powers that be want to squelch that.
I think the major problem has been that, we heard these heartbreaking stories. Regular people, scientists, whoever thinks that there's something different than the narrative, you're going to get destroyed. That's happened over and over again, even to very prominent scientists. When we wrote the Great Barrington Declaration, 4 days after we wrote it, the head of the National Institute of Health, Francis Collins, wrote to Tony Fauci calling for a devastating takedown of the premises of the Declaration. A lot of the censorship that's happened of scientific discussion comes from the top. Those, the federal officials were working to suppress what they called misinformation, but actually what they suppressed was scientific discussion. As a result, just take the vaccines. The vaccines could have been used to protect vulnerable older people. I advocated for that through the pandemic. The vaccines, I do believe, reduce the mortality risk from getting COVID. And for those who have a high mortality from COVID, especially older people, it may have been justified. But the right way to use it is as a medical product where you tell people, go talk to your doctor and then decide if it's right for you. Instead, what happened was that we used the vaccines to try to, in a futile bid, to get the disease to go away. And it was really clear from the scientific evidence very early on that that wasn't going to work. We mandated the vaccines, and anyone who spoke up against the mandates were destroyed online, was destroyed. There was essentially a systematic attempt to suppress that kind of discussion, even among qualified experts. I'll tell you, I've been working as a professor at Stanford Medical School for 22 years, and I've never felt so much difficulty expressing my professional thoughts about vaccines, masks, lockdowns. It's been tremendously difficult to try to be able to say what I believe the scientific evidence is saying. It shouldn't be like that. What should happen is we should have a free and open discussion among all scientists. Science is a complicated thing, and people are going to disagree with each other. It's only in an environment of free speech, no suppression. And I think it's really from the top of the government, the United States government, including people like Tony Fauci, that used their power with the media and other ways to try to suppress that discussion. And I think a lot of the problems that happened, the imposition of the mandates, came from the suppression of that kind of discussion. I think that's something that needs to be reformed. The medical profession, public health profession, should not sit on top of society. We're part of society. We help. Our goal, ideally, is to help. And what's happened instead is we've had this regime where people on top say, here's what you must do, and if you don't do it, we're going to silence you.
And one of the places where you see that is unfortunately at our universities, with not just how they treat dissenting faculty, but with administrative policies imposed on students. And of course, in Florida, you know, we banned the colleges from forcing COVID shots on the students, but you have, I think, a couple hundred universities throughout the country that are still mandating this booster shot on these undergraduates. And so, Tracy, I know you've studied this, so can you talk about just what you're seeing with the data and then evaluate that policy?
Absolutely, yeah. So I first want to touch on something that Jay mentioned just now too, which is that I think it's important for people to know that it's not just the Great Barrington Declaration scientists that have been censored. It's many of us who maybe didn't completely follow the narrative, but were willing to speak out about concerns, and we weren't, following exactly what the dominant narrative was at the time in the media. And I personally was censored on Facebook, had my posts removed after I had written a piece about why children shouldn't be forced to mask in school. And then my posts started to disappear automatically after I would write them when I would write about risk to children. And then about what we're going to be talking about now, which is vaccine risks. And my posts disappeared from Twitter. Eventually they were marked, and then they were completely removed about my concerns about myocarditis after the vaccine in adolescent boys. And that was a post from June of 2021 that ended up being, completely factually correct. And I think that's also important for people to recognize, is a lot of what has gotten censored has ended up being proven to be correct. And so the most recent study that my research group did about the vaccine mandates in college-age students. I think it's important to frame this with knowing that with the fact that the initial trials for the vaccines, we didn't know if they reduced actual infection risk. We only knew that they reduced risk of having a symptomatic case. And we didn't also know how long any effect was going to last, and we didn't know if there was going to be a reduction in transmission. And so I think a lot of maybe false promises and were given about what the effect of these vaccines were going to be. And so I do think that that's how initially the mandates started for the vaccines. And that people thought that, okay, we're going to be protecting society by doing this. And like Jay said, that maybe we can eliminate COVID. But we very quickly actually saw that that wasn't going to be the case. But our policies did not adapt to that. And we jumped too quickly to mandating a vaccine where we didn't have risk-benefit analyses, especially in lower-risk age groups. And so our most recent paper looked at the college age booster mandates, and we found a highly unfavorable risk-benefit analysis where if you look at the rate of severe adverse events for these young people from taking the vaccine, it's over 18-fold higher than their expected reduction of COVID-19 hospitalizations from getting that booster dose. Add to that, you would expect around or up to 4 to 5 cases of myocarditis in young males after the vaccine compared to the number of reductions of cases or reductions in hospitalization from COVID-19 for that booster dose. And then you will have hundreds of grade 3 or severe reactogenicity, meaning students are having trouble carrying out their daily activities because of their reaction to the vaccine that should also be taken into account. And so we found this highly unfavorable risk-benefit analysis, and yet over 200 colleges nationwide are still requiring the booster. Between 20 and 30 are requiring specifically the bivalent booster, which we don't actually have any randomized data on that to show any benefit. In terms of hospitalization, we really only have an MMWR study that was confounded, that did not find very impressive benefit, even with the confounded data that they published. And so we're in a situation where we have decreasing risks for COVID-19 because of the Omicron variant, because recent modeling study from Harvard show around 95% of people have already been infected. And we don't actually know what benefits the individuals are getting from the booster vaccine, the vaccines at this time. And we're still coercing people to get the vaccine, and coercion on top of the negative side effects to the individual. Coercion has so many negative side effects on society, as we've been hearing about the vaccine injured today. It causes distrust in health, that people felt like they weren't given informed consent to take the vaccines to make their own decisions.
And I mean, I think some of these universities are forcing the students to do it, which is obviously wrong, but not the faculty. And so it's like you're focusing on the people that are most likely to have a bad outcome from the side effects, but are very unlikely to have any problems with the actual infection itself. So Dr. Freeman, so you've been looking at this issue. Yeah. If someone came up to you and just said, hey, doctor, are mRNA COVID shots safe and effective? How would you respond?
Well, if our mRNA shots are safe and effective, well, I would say that from the day that these were authorized in December, there was uncertainty on if the benefits were going to outweigh the harm. We didn't know. We did not know. It's not possible to have known that at that time. There were 4 people, I believe, who voted against authorizing it that day. In a climate of when everyone was scared, almost everyone, to vote no on that would have been. So there's uncertainty. There was definitely uncertainty on young people, people with no risk factors. That's clear. There was uncertainty when we authorized the booster. That is clear. We had all the scientists or nearly all, vote to not authorize it. They voted against authorizing it. Then the FDA came back and said, okay, how about just in over 65? Then they said, yes, we'll do it in over 65. Then the CDC, 2 to 3 weeks later, tries to authorize the booster for all ages. Scientists advisory board votes against it. CDC goes, let's not listen to these guys. Just recommends it for all age groups. The safe and effective terminology that's been used has been based on it's uncertainty. This is based on it's a lie. It has to be.
You've done some research actually to back that up.
Yes.
Can you talk about your study?
Sure. Yeah. So myself, along with 6 other scientists, our international team, we basically went back to the original clinical trials, looking at serious adverse events. And what I mean by serious is that you were either hospitalized, or you were permanently disabled, or dead, or a doctor thought that this was a very serious problem. So these are really bad events. They're defined by both Pfizer and Moderna and assigned by them. We're looking at that. We went in to reanalyze it, take a magnifying glass, look closer, because they originally reported that there was no harm. There was no serious harm from these vaccines. And so we basically were using a list that was a WHO-endorsed list of adverse events that they thought were potentially going to be caused by the vaccine before we ever even authorized it. So we took that list and applied that and saw, are there more of these types of events in the vaccine group than in the placebo group? So to do this, we start counting all the adverse events in the trial, in the back tables, in the appendix. To our surprise, in the Pfizer trial, the first vaccine to go through, there was a 37% increase in the number of serious adverse events. That was never reported, not by the FDA, not by Pfizer. In fact, Pfizer says, I may get it verbatim wrong, but they said that the incidence of serious adverse events are similar in the vaccine and placebo group. A 37% increase is not similar. It's actually statistically significantly different. So how that happened is difficult to understand, but it did happen. Then, once we got past that phase of the study, we actually to do the reanalysis of what we're trying to do. It turns out with both Pfizer and Moderna, we had a 1 in 800 risk of serious adverse events. These are from that list. So now, to understand what a 1 in 800 means, consider that our other vaccines have about a 1 in a million. 1 in a million, maybe 2 in a million. This is not the same sort of safe. This is 1 in 800 is disastrous if true. And think about the risk of people from COVID, not even catching it and then getting sick. I mean, you have COVID right now. Most people, the majority of people, don't have a 1 in 800 chance of even being hospitalized. This is an elderly group who's at risk. For them, I think there becomes more of a debate maybe with them. And but now with, as Tracy was saying, we have Omicron, which the risk of hospitalization, I personally have not hospitalized. I've hospitalized one patient since February of this year, since Omicron. I am not seeing people sick in the ER with Omicron. They come in, they get admitted for things unrelated, but that's my own personal anecdotal experience. I know they report it otherwise. But we have Omicron now, and we also have 95% of people are infected. Is the benefit outweigh these harms in this environment? Nobody has any idea. There's no way to know that because you need a study to figure that out. It's the only way, but we just keep recommending safe and effective. Doesn't change. It's not even a scientific wording, safe. It's not safe and effective. It's more of a campaign, like a campaign slogan, or not even. It's a advertisement.
And that 1 in 800 number, that's for short-term risks. That's before we get to the things we don't yet know about, the things that might occur 2 years down the road, autoimmune disorders, cancers, and the like. So that's a conservative number.
It's within the first 2 months.
Joe, do you want to talk about what you found with the data in Florida looking at folks and the myocarditis?